So reducing the impact of GDPR on your marketing. As David mentioned, obviously you need to be prepared with, opt-ins for email, websites, and forms. That is all pretty straightforward. The one thing that he did talk about and that I want to go into a little bit more detail on is that fourth one there, consent for data analysis. That's when David was talking about profiling objections. So if you're trying to analyze patterns to profile buyers based on their habits or personas, you need their consent. If they decline that, you have to remove them from your data set. Now, obviously you might think, okay, well, if I have a data set that I'm analyzing and I keep removing people from it, that's going to complicate the level of personalization that I can do because my data isn't full, right? So it could hinder that personalization that's so important to customer experiences, but it's really impossible to know exactly what those effects will be just yet. So it's just something to keep in mind. But that's one that's a lesser known or lesser talked about aspect of GDPR is that data analysis consent. So just be aware of that one. Written consent for event data. This one's an interesting one as well. Marketing consent is not implied just because somebody drops their card into your fishbowl. You can gain verbal consent. Verbal consent is legal if you inform them that their information might be used for marketing purposes. But as David mentioned, you do have to be able to prove that you are getting the right consent for things, so that documentation about that information. So the best approach to take would be to have them sign some form of written consent, so if you ever need to show that documented proof, you have it handy. So if they drop their business card in your fishbowl to win a prize, and you're going to use that information for something, you just say, hey, here's a little bit of information on that. Can you just sign this for us? If you're not comfortable with that, you pull your card out of the fishbowl. Because, as I said, verbal consent's legal, but how do you really prove that is the question.
Well, on that note too, if I may, Diane, on that note too,
yes,
I think one of the things I think you'll start to see at events and trade shows and the like is contractual language in the agreements for the provider of the show. Because obviously you're going to go to a show, they're going to share, the question comes up, can I share the data or can I share the attendee list? And I think you might find contractually some strategies around that, right? But you're right, if you're in the booth, you're absolutely correct. But I think if you're the provider of that event, it just makes sense to have some sort of contractual language in the agreement that a vendor would sign and also attendee would sign, right, going into it, knowing that, hey, I have written consent on the deal that I've signed up, and that will take a little pressure off the folks like ourselves who are doing are in the booths and et cetera, et cetera. But again, burden of proof lies on the marketer, right? So that's something to think about.
Very important observation. And actually, we have another question about implied consent. Is there any implied consent based on being a customer who has purchased, so such as invoice, estimates, follow-up questionnaire on customer service or experience?
I think, again, there is an implied consent mechanism in Canada, for example. I have not seen one in the European Union, but the reality is if you have an existing business relationship with someone anyway, then why wouldn't you consider reaching out, and really sort of, utilizing that implied consent relationship or the EBR that you have anyway to formulate a more engaged situation, right? And that's okay, I think. I mean, provided you're doing it in the right way in terms of getting that consent. So I think it's one of those things where, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation around, well, B2B doesn't it's not GDPR, it doesn't have to be compliant with GDPR, and that's not necessarily accurate. I think what is accurate is using the tenets of compliance and consent in order to fulfill and establish that relationship moving forward. And if you already have that business relationship in place, then you're ahead of the curve. The secret sauce is going to be, the call to action that you deploy and how you strategize to engage that individual deeper in your program.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Okay, so the third one that we're going to talk about on this slide is just being careful of list buying. So a lot of experts are actually predicting that GDPR is probably going to be the end of at least the European data list industry. I could see that crossing over in a lot of ways. So as you transition to organic efforts, or if you're thinking about transitioning to organic efforts, in the meantime, if you continue to do list buying, just know that you are responsible for that. So the list supplier becomes the data processor once you purchase that list. So you're buying a list of personal data that makes you the controller in the eyes of the GDPR, and that makes you legally responsible. So you need proper documentation to know the origin of that data. Where was it collected? By whom? What was communicated to the data subjects about the purposes and storage period, etc. Individuals have the rights to know those facts if they ask, so you want to be able to answer them. You'll be lawfully obliged to hand out that information at their will. So
definitely buyer beware on that one. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
Yeah, we've basically nixed the list buying process. We did that about a year or so ago, but it was just in time because in general too, you don't really know the assurances when you buy the lists. Sometimes aren't very accurate, or the contacts that are in there anyway are not very accurate. So,
right.
It's better to just generate it organically, and then you actually know that a person is truly interested because you've had contact with that person.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
our last 3 points about reducing the impact of GDPR on your marketing is getting your team prepared. So every project, every campaign, every marketing initiative needs to have data privacy and protection in mind, as David did mention earlier. One consideration might be creating a handbook or a guideline sheet that each team member can reference. So if you have team members in different departments that are going to be handling the data differently, maybe creating a little checklist for each department. Here's things you need to keep in mind when you're handling data. Weighing inbound versus outbound marketing. So even though many experts are predicting GDPR will drive the number of new leads down and or potentially slow down the marketing efforts, there might be a plus side to that. By shifting your focus to more of these inbound-centric types of strategies, you can worry less about that quantity because more of your leads will be quality. So just think about it. If someone opts in for information, that is the clearest indicator you could have that they're interested in hearing from you, which makes them a higher quality lead. So get to work creating white papers, guides, ebooks, or whatever the other tools that your leads find useful so you have something valuable to offer them in exchange for their consent. And this idea of higher quality leads bleeds into your emails too. Right now, there's a lot of bombardment in our email inboxes by promotions, and there's so many so that we might not truly take the time to stop and look at them. So if you have less competing emails going to your audience, even though your audience is smaller, they might be more likely to look at yours because it is more relevant to them. And then lastly, alternate opt-in strategies on your website. So to offset some of those lost leads, try offering website visitors additional ways to opt in. So for example, if someone finds your product news page valuable, maybe they want to opt in for updates on it. Embed a form or a pop-up on that page that allows them to quickly opt themselves in. Same can be done for various other pages, like a video page. If they want an alert when you add a new video, give them that option. Maybe someone wants a summary of your recent blog posts emailed to them each week. So you can get creative, and you can just create these unique options for the content of your website pages to supplement, lost leads that you may get